Hello and welcome to Newsclick. Today we have with us Professor C.P. Chandrasekhar, who's been following up on the issues of Ambani versus Ambani or the gas pricing, which was a part of the Ambani versus Ambani battle. Professor Chandrasekhar, good to have you with us.
Good to be here.
One of the issues that have really come up in this whole Ambani versus Ambani battle, which was about the price of gas which would be delivered to Anil Ambani's power plants. The issue has really been sparked off by Government of India prescribing $4.20 as a price of 1 million BTU of gas. Now this $4.2 BTU seems to have been really produced out of the top of somebody's head. And it's really much higher than what NTPC agreement with Reliance was, and of course also much higher, which is $2.34. What is the agreement with also Anil Ambani's group? So what explains this $4.20?
Well, it was supposed to have been arrived at by a committee of the government, which was set up by the government. Then it of course went up to the group of ministers. But I would look at it the following way. If you look at the transparency involved in arriving at this price, it wasn't a very transparent process at all. Therefore, the way to approach it, I think, is twofold. One is, it was part of a process in which the government, not just in oil, but in a whole set of areas where it's giving access to mineral resources, to oil resources, and of course to public sector assets, to the private corporate sector, as part of a process of what's almost like primitive accumulation, that you are trying to adjust prices upwards in order to be able to facilitate this process of the state moving out and bringing in the private sector as part of an attempt to reward the Indian corporate sector in the context of liberalization and globalization. The second aspect to it, I think, is the overall understanding that there should be, I wouldn't call it a market determined, but a price which is calibrated to international prices. And the way in which the calibration is occurring thus far is that we are trying to push up prices closer to international prices whenever they're high, but when downward adjustments occur, it gets reflected more or less in higher profits. So it's a combination of allowing flexibility in pricing and allowing play for the private sector, but both structured in a fashion which facilitates primitive accumulation.
Interestingly enough, if you really look that, apart from the fact the prices don't really come down, interestingly enough, if you look at the calculations that were submitted in court, it made very clear that Reliance Industries was going to recover at this price of gas its entire investments in about 7 years. Now that, for a capital investment of this nature, that seems to be extremely small as a period. It seems to be, it would indicate that the prices are very high.
And let us not forget, part of the controversy was that there was an inflation in the capital figures. I mean, I can't vouch for this, but that was part of the controversy.
And this 7 years is apart from
yeah,
that.
That's right. So
taking this into consideration.
So I mean, so there is in some sense an effort to skim off a surplus. And what we're doing is we are now giving that to everybody. It's going to percolate down to other private players, and we know that some of these oil fields which are prospected by the ONGC. So for a long period of time, this process has been going on, and the Ambani versus Ambani battle was really a battle which was lost by one side, because in the battle for his own personal empire, maybe, he stood on the wrong side of the liberalization debate on this instance.
The court, post the court verdict, it appears that now they're sort of making up, and it looks like that the two empires are going to come together, which means that the monopoly weight they would pull in the Indian economy would be really very high. Do you think it portends a danger for rest of the people in the economy?
Yeah, I think it's a sort of stark instance of the emergence of a sort of India incorporated, a sort of coalescence between the state and private capital, in which there are certain rules which are set, but rules which favor private capital, and to the extent that there exist disputes within the private sector, since you cannot. Earlier, the problem was the state maintained a distance in order to prevent itself from being seen as favoring one segment of capital vis-a-vis another. Here what you're doing is you're actually trying to get this capital to come together. So maybe getting the brothers to sit together and renegotiate a private agreement between them, them or their companies, in the light of what was an award given by the state in terms of pricing, was, I think, a part of this, this new world of a coalescence between state and big capital in India.
So, following more or less the Japanese and the South Korean model, with the state virtually fused with the big business over there.
Yes, true. And I think, of course, given the context maybe, and given the specific nature of the Indian state currently, is, maybe we even go further. For example, we know the kind of backing which the Tatas received to make the acquisitions, a set of acquisitions at prices which at that point of time just didn't make sense. But we know it's being backed by the public sector banks, for example, in very large measure. So you're backing
the
capital.
VSNL
Yes,
acquisition.
giving this huge amount of surplus cash, which then gets invested in an enterprise, which is a startup, and which is
Tata Telecom.
Yeah, that's right.
Industry. Do you also see that a part of the surplus, in that sense, Reliance Industries parted with in order to paper over the differences and make up the fact that, giving some money out, buying the tower infrastructure that Reliance Anil Ambani had?
Yeah, I think getting out of the no compete agreement which there was, and giving each other space in each other's territory, is not just an aggravation of competition. It also is a process of a redivision, in which you actually have one empire with two heads, but you sort of redivide the market in some sense. One of the things of the business group in India is that the business group consisted of legally independent companies, which in different ways functioned as if they were one giant corporate firm. You shared capital assets, you helped each other in marketing and advertising, there was cross investments and so on. So it's possible that we'll have now two legally independent business groups now, which actually are one business group of the kind that Hazari had talked about earlier. So it may be that we are once again having one Ambani group, even though it exists in terms of a set of legally independent companies which seem to come under different decision-making authorities.
It's interesting because as of now, the Reliance Industries is not only in the production of gas, it's in the distribution of gas, it's in the transmission, the pipelines. It is something which was supposed to be bad when it came to the electricity sector, and you really restructured by saying all this should be split. We don't seem to be doing the same thing for gas.
No, when it comes to the private sector, these rules never apply. In fact, the interesting thing about the Reliance Group is that the old Reliance Group was respected to the extent that it was respected from the point of view of business strategy, because unlike the hedging of bets, where you spread yourself thin across a large number of areas, Reliance started in synthetic fibers and then vertically integrated, which means it risked its capital in a few areas, undertaking highly capital intensive, large scale investments. Their average capacities in polyester fiber, for example, were in the 50,000 to 100,000 ton range, when we had 9,000, 10,000 ton capacities. Therefore, they could easily outcompete. But they outcompeted in the market, not in terms of price, because of the fact that that's the huge surpluses they got, and they reinvested it in these areas. Today, what is Reliance? It's like any other business group. You touch an area varying from the media almost, not directly and openly maybe, but going then down to oil, going into electricity, going into retail trade, every area. One of the Reliance groups is there, and now possibly both of them would be there. So it's become like the typical group which spreads itself across there is no notion of co-competence here.
But that's very interesting that we have moved from the slogan of self-reliance into now only reliance, effectively taking over the whole of the economy.
Well, yes, there are other business groups, but I'm sure that we haven't seen this kind of dramatic growth which has been sustained, and dramatic growth in which there's an obvious, huge amount of surplus being skimmed out of the system, but that surplus remains untaxed for the larger public good.
And also supported the government to generate this kind of surplus.
Of course.
Thank you, Professor Chandrasekhar. This has been a very interesting discussion. We hope to see you again on such similar topics.
Oh, thank you. And I'm sure we'd meet again on this, because Reliance is not going to go away.